Hi, this is Ethan Dettenmaier with Combat Radio on Brigade-Radio-One. And for this year's Combat Radio Halloween CD, I've decided to pull a chapter from an upcoming book I wrote called No Quarter. The chapter is called The Lord of Two Worlds. It's available, places. Check out our social media to figure out where you can get the book if you are interested, and have a happy Halloween. The following is a chapter from Donovan Reed's combat record with the Venger. His editor, London-based Giles and Hackett Limited, made the decision to edit the following passage out of the overall combat narrative because they felt it was not to be believed, that the average reader could not retain the darker elements in it. It was more of an All Hallows Eve story than the notes of a notorious privateer. Nonetheless, it is here, the first of several missing chapters, as it were. The Lord of Two Worlds. There was a warning flare off the port bow. We moved to the railing to see the longboat in the distance, drifting through the fog. Curious, Haro put down his spyglass and looked to Mr. Thorne. "Bring us alongside. We'll check for survivors." As we rolled up, we got a closer look of an image that was more suited for a dream or nightmare than our own reality. We could see people on board, looking pale and lying in an almost peaceful-looking manner as if asleep. Everyone on the longboat was in their Sunday finest clothes, but they all appeared dead, the women and the children. One woman was still clutching her parasol. Mr. Jopo, our African witch doctor, and Dr. Johannes dropped on board the launch and began checking the passengers to see if anyone was alive. They all had violent neck wounds. Blood stained their collars and garments. "Damn curious," Johannes said as he stood up from his examination and turned to look back at Essex at the rail. "What is it, Doctor?" "It is as it appears, sir. All dead." He looked over the bodies of the young children. "Regrettably," he added. "What killed them?" Haro asked. "Plague?" Johannes remained silent as if to place his words carefully. "Dehydration and blood loss." There was more to his report, but he held his tongue as to not alarm the crew. Essex nodded. He'd take the report in confidence later, and just as we started to bring our medical staff back aboard, there was another warning from the crow's nest. Halleck pointed forward to the northeast, and Lynch called out, "Ahead, in the fog!" In the mist, a shape began to slowly emerge. A ship run aground on some rocks. It was a suspicious sight. The captain added caution, checked our depth, and ordered the men to weapons as we pulled close. Darrenfall handed me a gun, and then pulled the hammer back on his. Thorne, Bishop, Mr. Toombs, Bonds, and the rest of the Hurons took the railing next to me, ready to fire. Newcastle lowered his spyglass and looked to Essex. "It's the Marauder." "Out of Yorktown?" Haro asked, with a touch of curiosity, making sure the identification was correct. "Vanguardian ship." Essex knew the boat and the captain. "All the way out here?" As we pulled closer, we took sight of something quite horrific. The body of a man was fastened across the wheel, as if it was a whipping post. "Good God," Haro exhaled. "Raider, Wolf, take your men aboard." "Yes, sir." Raider gave the signal and his men swung across the water and crashed down on the deck. They began to spread out and secure their surroundings, weapons at the ready. De Leon and Lau moved to the quarter-deck and slowly approached the poor soul, harnessed to the steering, crucified to the wheel, eyes opened and rolled over white. Mouth locked open, as if he died screaming. Upon closer examination, De Leon found the wound that killed him. A vicious wound in the neck, like a beast had taken a bite out of him. Missing throat, voice box, and jugular. Some of his jawbone was exposed. Lau's blade cut through the air with a whistle as he revealed it, then swung it down to cut the man clear of the steering. His body dropped to the deck. Meanwhile, Wolf kicked open the doors to the officers' quarters and moved in for a search. Maps, documents, a pistol, and a lantern on the last of its wick, but still aglow. Essex watched from his position on the Venger as Rabal and his men dropped below deck to continue the search. There, on the gun deck, there was a strange, almost eerie silence and very little light. Obal began to open the gun port doors to let in some daylight and a little fog. But other than the guns, there was nothing there. Not a soul. No gunners, no crewmen. Nothing. The cannons locked in place, weapons still in their racks, powder and ball still secured. Even further down, the hull had been breached, but the water had only risen to the level of the tide on the rocks, waist high. Archer slowly stepped into the dark water, using his hands to feel around for anything relevant. What was odd was that the ship was provisioned. There were barrels of molasses, salt, rum, fresh water. Obal checked the supplies and with a taste found that they were still good. None of it seemed tainted. Kai, Town, Arzulu, Chata, and the others began to offload the cargo. Raider climbed back on the top deck and called out his report to the captain. Full cargo, 1 dead man aboard. Doesn't make much sense, Haro said as his eyes started to the captain. The captain looked back with a look that seemed to suggest there might be a reason to be concerned. Back below deck on the Marauder, the hull was creaking as we continued the process of unloading their cargo to make it our own, loading the massive nets, using ropes and pulleys to pull them through the decks, over the water, and across to the Venger. We took everything: food, silks, tools, weapons, rope, canvas, spare lumber, nails, dates, sacks of coconuts, candles, lanterns, and barrels of water, sugar, wine, and spices. I was about to head topside when I noticed damage to the woodwork by the bilge bay hatch. Something that looked like massive, deep claw marks. I ran my fingers over them. What the hell did that? Never mind that, Archer got my attention. Let's clear out before the hull collapses. Right. We started to climb back up. Back on the Venger, the sun was beginning to set. It seems damn peculiar, Haro said as he turned to see the captain and Mr. Thorne going over the maps to plot a course out of the area. Of that, I am aware. Essex did not look up from his work. I know how your mind works, Haro. You must fact and figure until there's no mystery left. 'Tis true I hate the odd fact, and I do despise mystery, but I heard the report, and I dare say that this situation here should bother you too, Captain. He paused. Should it not? The more Haro talked, the more Essex felt inclined to reach for the bottle of rum holding the maps down, but he withstood the temptation. Haro slowly continued. 1 man, strapped to the wheel? Suddenly Jafar, our more combat captain, stepped to the quarterdeck, and though I had never seen Jafar show fear, he did appear concerned. Captain, Essex looked up. Off the starboard side, sir, in the fog. Essex stepped to the rail, took the spyglass from Dawes, and focused on the area off the starboard bow. There, in the mist, a beach could be seen, but it was not the beach that was our concern. On the beach, hanging from posts, were body cages. Each seemed to imprison a skeleton. This is how they punished privateers back in England. They imprisoned them. They imprisoned them in a body cage and left them to die there. Essex slowly lowered his glass. Bastards! And without taking his eyes off the coastline, he said, Mr. Jafar, put a combat party together, prepare to go ashore and fire the town. Out came the weapons and torches as Jafar moved to assemble some men. Teague, Otto, Kai, and a few of the Ronin, Jagger, Lotan, Mr. Toombs, Miranda, Nighthorse, Bonds, Sanjuro, Khan Bor, and a few of the Aztecs, Rabal, Irons, Duncan Howe, Giraud, the former French legionnaire, Taine and myself joined Jafar, Magdanen V, and a few of the other Moors, fully armed. I had long since become aware of a common pattern here. If Teague, Jafar, and Nighthorse were going ashore in an unknown land, there was going to be violence, or a small war. That night, we went ashore for vengeance. The sight of the body cages on the beach and in the tide, lined with bones, made us angry. Mob justice against those of us from the sea was not to be tolerated. Our fate was not for townspeople to decide, and I, for one, feared the cage. Pirates had been known to survive them, immobilized for several weeks, unable to prevent being picked apart by maggots and birds before death set in. Once ashore and out of the tide, the Aztecs, superstitious as they were known to be, became nervous and formed into tight ranks, like a defensive position, clicking their small words and sounds together in a nervous fashion, weapons ready. What's gotten into you? Teague asked. Khan Bor mumbled a few broken words and clicks in his high-pitched voice as he continued to look towards the sky in a fearful fashion. I looked up. Other than a few bats and a full moon, there was nothing to be afraid of. But it was obvious they were scared and would not advance. Teague surveyed Khan Bor and calculated his disposition. Then he looked at Jafar, then to Night Horse in his war paint, Rabal and the rest of us, and asked, "Anyone else?" There was silence. I must admit I wanted to raise my hand, and Teague looked at me as if he suspected I was about to do just that. But I was well aware that I would never live it down, so my hand remained a clenched fist around the handle of my cutlass. He then ordered our platoon forward, leaving the Aztecs on the shoreline to protect the longboats. Teague thought not to press them, perhaps because a scared, superstitious man is more dangerous than the enemy, and Teague only wanted willing men in combat. As we moved through the darkness, I quickened pace to get alongside Duncan Howe, again a confidant who would not rob me of my self-esteem when I asked a question others would think foolish. Why are the Aztecs staying on the beach? Superstition. He stopped to ignite his pipe, which lit up his face for a moment, and then he said with clarification, "They're scared." He exhaled the smoke and looked me in the eye as if to see if his words had any effect, as if to see if I was scared too, and indeed I was. The unknown had always scared me most of all, and although I had some confidence from the men around me, the darkness that lay ahead had me on edge. What was up there, on the dark road to town? I was even more alarmed by the fact that Duncan Howe did not tell me not to worry, or that there was nothing to be afraid of, but his silence seemed to imply that indeed there was. We pressed forward through the fog, the mountains up ahead against the moon, speared out of the ground like claws, an unsettling sight. We used torches to cut through the darkness and moved up the beach, under the trees, and over an old Gothic stone bridge that bricked its way over a lagoon. From there we moved forward through a low-lying fog to an old Christian cemetery, and we moved through the jagged stone markings, crude in their shape, chiseled with an uncertain perfection. Beyond that came the first signpost. Under a lantern we could see a proclamation, "Beware," and what appeared to be orders from the populace to move indoors, off the streets before dark, mind the warning bell, and bolt your doors. It's as if they were expecting us. Indeed, the warning was much like the ones posted throughout the colonies about us. It had a similar ring to it. Perhaps that's why Addo put his torch to it. We moved forward into the township proper, lit by the full moon. The buildings appeared dark, abandoned. There was a little lantern light in a window here or there, but very little life. We made survey of the area, then continued to move up. A slamming sound suddenly got our attention, and we looked to our right at a building that had its front doors banging away in the wind. Teague tilted his head in that direction, and Rabal and Irons kicked the doors open and stormed the dark building. It was dead inside, empty. They made an exit, eased their weapons, and we continued into town. We moved up to an inn and decided to enter. Guiraud remained on watch outside. There was an innkeeper behind the bar, and he appeared almost motionless and nervous, clearly surprised to see us enter. Teague surveyed his surroundings, and Irons moved forward to the bar. "Rum," he commanded. I have none, sir," the rattled innkeeper returned, but I have wine." Irons waved it forward. The innkeeper's hand trembled as he reached for the bottle. He filled a mug, which Irons made vanish in one swallow. Teague leaned against the bar, close to the innkeeper. He picked up a coin off the bar top and passed it through his fingers like a magic trick. And keeping his eyes locked on the coin, he began to speak to the landlord. "Tell me the truth, and you may live. Lie to me." His eyes looked up at the nervous man. "And I'll kill you." He shifted his posture. "Who planted those cages on the beach?" Mandagnan V put both hands on his swords, waiting to pounce if he did not like the answer. The magistrate. It was a warning." Jafar grit his teeth. "And where is this magistrate?" Gone, sir." I did not like to see a man threatened, and I stepped forward to say something, but Duncan Howe put his hand out to stop me. "Gone where?" He was taken." Something seemed to prevent this man from speaking, but he did manage to hiss an answer. "The devil took him." "That, my friend, is impossible." Teague slowly looked up. His eyes looked dark in the dim candlelight. "For I am the devil." And out came the weapons. "No, wait!" The innkeeper panicked as Teague cracked his knuckles and threw his grip around the man's throat. "Please don't kill me!" Suddenly, the building shook like an earthquake. "What the hell?" We froze and looked up. Something slammed onto the ceiling like a powerful concussion blast. Dust fell from the rafters. The innkeeper couldn't breathe. He just trembled, gripped by a violent panic attack. Just then there was a gunshot. Guiraud suddenly stumbled through the doors from outside and collapsed inside the tavern, clutching his neck, bleeding heavily. He tried to raise himself off the floor while clutching his wound. Toombs took a defensive position and pulled 2 fresh pistols. Otto and Kai tried to help Guiraud to his feet, but he was already dead. They checked the wound. Most of his neck was missing. Miranda was in awe of the damage. What manner of weapon did that? The tavern keeper was beside himself. It's the shadow! He looked up at the ceiling as if the monster was on the roof, almost bouncing up and down. It's here! It's here! Teague released his grip and pulled his pistol. We formed a defensive circle, weapons out. Eyes locked on the ceiling. We could hear a creaking sound, like footsteps on the panels above. Then silence. A strange silence. A long silence. I felt the danger had passed, and just as I lowered my weapon, suddenly the floor exploded. Irons pulled through the floorboards as they turned into splinters, and he disappeared under the building. Pistols went off, blasting into the darkness. Sanjiro, Nighthorse, and Jagger jumped into the hole in the floor, weapons ready, and lit the foundations up with a torch, but Irons was gone. The substructure was vacant. There was nothing there. They climbed back through the shattered floorboards when something that felt like a hurricane blew past the building, almost shaking it apart, rattling shutters, doors, walls, and foundations with violence. Teague and the men stormed outside for a fight, but there was none to be had. The streets were empty. He turned to look at the rooftops, but there was nothing directly above either. But then, down the street at the edge of town, there was something. A dark figure of sorts, standing at the edge of a rooftop, and it appeared to be facing us, almost looking at us. There was a loud crack as Teague fired a round at it. Jafar, kill that thing! Jafar pulled his Arabian sword and closed in on the shadow, followed by the rest of us. But the shadow seemed to just step back into the darkness, and it disappeared into the shadows. Lightning lit up the area. I confessed my instincts were to flee, but the rest of the war party was not having it. These men had never run from anything in their lives, and they weren't about to start now. I stood shoulder to shoulder, such as it was, with Tane, though the tattooed islander was much larger than I was. He, too, was frustrated by all this. Back behind the bar, the innkeeper was shivering in a ball, cowering in fear. Nighthorse's massive hand reached over the bar and gripped the man by his hair, the same posture I'd seen him use many a times in combat when scalping his victims. He pulled the coward to his feet. "What is that thing?" Jagger asked. "The devil. He's been preying on the village since last autumn. Most of us were made to flee. But not you. No. Why? It has left a few of us alive for some reason. It prefers to stalk women and children." "Women, huh?" Jagger scoffed. "Where can we find it?" The innkeeper became even more alarmed. "It can't be killed." "I didn't ask you that," Jagger shouted. "We can kill anything," Teague added. "And if you don't tell us what we need to know, we're going to kill you first." "It's at the fortress," said a small voice from the corner. We turned as the innkeeper's daughter, maybe 8 years old, stepped into the candlelight. "You can't go there." There was even more of a shiver in the innkeeper's voice. "No one goes there. No one." Teague was point blank in tone, and with his arms crossed, he asked, "Why?" "Because it is the kingdom of the shadow." "Shadow? Tell me about this shadow." "The monster descends in darkness. He's cannibalized this town. No one has ever gone to the fortress and ever returned since the creature made it his domain. It takes the form of a man, sometimes a wolf or a jackal, and it lives on the blood of its victims." Teague's eyes darted over to Jagger, as if to size up what his thoughts were. "It's gone, back to the fortress, having won for the night." "Won?" Jagger questioned, blade still in hand. "The hell it has." "I will not be taunted," Teague said, and Jafar smiled in almost evil agreement. A grin that said, "Let's kill this thing and be done with it so we can get on with our evening. Where is this fortress?" Only the outline of the castle could be seen against the moon. We got a better look at it when the lightning flashed. A black carriage rested alone inside the main gates, abandoned. There were no guards for us to murder. The fortress itself appeared vacant, but there was something there. My instinct, paranoid as it was not often wrong when danger was around. We passed the gate and moved up the steps. I was hoping for a more subtle approach in our assault, but Jafar and Tombs decided to just kick in the front doors, and once cracked open, they relied on the great strength of Addo to push them clear the rest of the way. What matter a fortress doesn't bar its doors? One that isn't afraid of unwanted visitors, I answered, checking my surroundings. Inside was a great hall, but from the looks of it, it had not been occupied for years. It had Gothic ceilings like that of an old Roman cathedral. Tall windows and cobwebs covered everything. "Spread out and find this bastard." Spread out? I asked with a swallow. "Aye, spread out. Now." We did as commanded, and we were rough about it, flipping over a banquet table and bashing furniture apart until the first floor was reported clear. We then took to the massive staircase, moved up and stormed room after room. Finally, orders came down to torch the place. "Light it up," Teague ordered, and we did. We used our torches to light curtains, ignite tapestries, and anything else we could light and destroy. Suddenly, Nighthorse called out. He had found a hidden staircase heading down into the shadows below the castle. We gathered around the entrance and looked down into the pit of darkness. Miranda pulled a grenade from his pack, lit the fuse, and bounced it down the steps. It exploded below. There was a flash and an echo from the blast. And just when I was about to question our next move, Nighthorse pulled his tomahawk, and Teague did not hesitate to lead the way down. The descent seemed to take us down several levels, and I can now admit that I tried to stay behind Tane, using his size as a shield to cover me and peering over his shoulder from time to time. Once we hit the base of the stairs, we fanned out. The air was damp. Here was a vast underground chamber, as if the mountainside had been hollowed out. We could hear water dripping, but could not see much, even with our torches. There was a strange breeze, and I could hear waves like we were close to the tide, or under the rocks near the beach or something. "How far underground are we going to advance?" I asked. "All the way to hell, if needs be." But before we could take another step, I suddenly heard a psst and froze in my place. Then I could hear a quiet voice above me in the dark. It hissed my name. I looked up and raised my torch into the shadows to see the floor of a massive cage hanging from an unseen chamber ceiling with irons locked in it. What the? As I illuminated my surroundings, I could see several other cages slowly moving in the breeze, some with townspeople locked in, pale and barely alive. The others lined with skeletons. My God! We all looked up to take notice. This thing was keeping people in cages and feeding off them. "Get me the hell out of here," Irons said in the appropriate tone of terror. "Tane, give me a hand." Tane boosted me up to the cage, and I climbed up and heaved myself up to the lock. I pulled my knife and tried leverage to break it, but no luck. "It's no use." "What about a grenade? Can we blow it open?" Duncan Howe asked, looking up from the ground. "Not without killing him." "Read," Jagger said in a defiant tone. "Take a grenade, open it up, pour the powder into the lock, and ignite it." Without waiting for an order, Duncan Howe pitched me a grenade, and I dropped my torch to Otto to catch. I screwed open and tapped the powder into the keyhole and asked for my torch. We had seen enough combat to know what to do, if this was to even work. I dropped to the ground as I hit the lock with my torch. Irons would turn around and get down to protect himself. From there, we just hoped that my calculation on the amount of powder was enough to blow the lock without killing all of us. I looked down, and Addo threw me my torch back, and as I gripped it, I mustered my courage. But just as I was about to press the torch to the lock, something dripped on my head. Water or something. I looked up using the torch to light the darkness above me, and there it was! The shadow standing on top of the cage, looking down at me with black eyes that reflected the flames from my torch. I panicked and fell to the ground, screaming. Musket and pistol fire erupted, and the blast illuminated the room with a series of flashes like lightning. The shadow moved from cage top to cage top, drawing fire, making a horrific, high-octane scream, like that of an eagle, only 10 times louder. "Kill this damn thing!" Hal threw a lit grenade skyward, and it exploded, lighting up the cavern and blowing shrapnel in every direction, and the shadow disappeared. "Hal, watch that!" Teague shouted. "You're gonna blow us all to hell." "I think we're already in hell." Duncan Howe's teeth clenched down on his pipe as he gripped another grenade. "I fought the Dutch, the Crown, even goddamn cannibals, but I'll be damned if I let a shadow be the enemy. Just don't kill us in the process." "I'm not dying in no damn cage." Iron dropped to the cage floor. "Rabal, pitch me your torch." Rabal stood in a defensive stance, cutlass in hand, not sure from what part of the darkness the beast would strike. He threw the torch up to Irons and pulled a second sword. Without concern, Irons placed the torch against the outside of the lock, and boom! The explosion blew the lock apart, rocked the cage on its chain, and sucked all the air out of the immediate atmosphere around him, leaving him wounded and gasping. The cage was blown across the chamber like it was on a pendulum. Suddenly, my clothes ignited. There was powder on them, and I slapped out the flames, rolled to my feet, and looked into the darkness above. Where was this damn thing? And then it began to quiet down again. Suddenly, the cage that housed Iron suddenly dropped to the floor. The blast must have displaced it. Now may be a good time to reassess our situation, Miranda said in a calm manner, though his eyes remained fixed on the chamber above him. We're not leaving here until we kill this thing, Teague said through his teeth. Understand? Aye, Jagger agreed, and he regripped his sword. No damn shadow will command my destiny. We kill this bastard now. Just as Miranda nodded in agreement, he was suddenly picked up into the darkness, kicking and screaming. Again, we unloaded our guns until his body was dropped back to the floor, eyes open, dead. Time to balance the odds. Suddenly, Hal pitched a grenade to Sanjuro. They unscrewed the 2 grenades and poured the powder into a wide circle around us, leaving me somewhat in the middle. Then they used a torch to ignite it and light up the room. Now we can at least see this bastard. Jagger pointed his sword. There it is! Beyond the flames, the shadow was walking right towards us. This beast must have been 3 meters tall. We braced ourselves for attack, or in my case, defense, as the shadow slowly walked through the flames. It caught fire, but did not flinch until it picked up speed and started to come at me. Oh no! It charged me full force, gripped my neck, and blew me backwards until I wheeled back and fell into the cage behind me. The cell door slammed shut with this beast on top of me. I found myself locked in close quarters fighting for my life, but I managed to get the blade of my knife in between its sharp teeth so it could not clamp down on me. The shore party stormed the cage and jammed their swords through the bars to kill the shadow, and a few even fired muskets, with total disregard for my safety. Get me out! Get me out of here, I screamed, as the blades came in from all sides. I kicked and I punched for my life as this thing ripped my flesh and cut my face. Suddenly it stood straight up with such force it threw the cage open. Then Sanjuro stepped up, gripped his samurai sword, gritted his teeth, and took the villain's head clean off with a violent swing. The body remained in place, standing upright, still on fire, but headless, until it fell back dead. I was singed, cut, exhausted, but alive. I feel you may have used me as bait. Teague began to give me a hand up. You were the closest thing to a woman we could find, he smiled. Jagger and the others laughed at my expense. Lowe and Duncan Howe dusted me off and helped me clear the cell. I looked at the burning body in front of me with morbid curiosity. What was this thing? What was this place? And as my eyes canvassed the ceiling, was it alone? As the fire burned this beast down to a skeleton, I saw a large key ring in the ashes. I picked it up with a scarf and reopened the cages of the surviving townspeople so they could seek their freedom. Dawn was starting to break as we stepped clear of the fortress, and as we moved back through town, we picked up the bodies of our fallen comrades, Giraud, Miranda, and carried them with us, for they would be buried at sea. Teague, without breaking stride, slammed the severed head of this beast on the signpost marked Beware, a new warning for any more of its kind who may want to descend upon this village, now or in the future. This has been The Lord of Two Worlds from the book No Quarter by yours truly, Ethan Dettenmaier, wishing all of you a happy Halloween from all of us at Combat Radio and Brigade-Radio-One.